To this module. In this module, we are going to go through the needs for the anxious attachment style individual in relationship to self and in relationship to other. Other specifically meaning that we are going to cover how the anxious attachment style individual interacts with individuals from other attachment styles and what the needs dynamic is between the anxiously attached person and other attachment individuals. So we are going to go through the 7 areas of life, and we're going to talk about the different needs that the anxiously attached individual has from both themselves and others in each of these 7 areas. So first and foremost, career-wise, it is very important that the anxiously attached individual finds that they have a lot of connection in the career area of their life. So they want to have some kind of social or emotionally connected dynamic in the workplace. It's not the best situation for the anxiously attached individual to spend a lot of time working in solitude or to spend a lot of time being alone in the career front. It's also very important for the anxiously attached individual to feel like they have some form of emotional support, especially from the authority figures in the workplace if they have them. So they always want to feel like they can go to their boss or their supervisor and have conversations and get feedback, and they want to feel like they're truly supported by their authority figures. It's also very important that they have some kind of sense of community outside of the workplace, to know that they have friendships in the workplace and that they can spend time with these individuals in the workplace outside of work, and that there's actually this emotional bond. And so as a general rule, human interaction is a very important quality in the career front for the anxiously attached individual. Anything they can do that's like client facing or there's a dynamic where it involves a lot of human interaction as a whole is super effective for the anxiously attached person. This is where they tend to thrive because so many of their needs revolve around connection and closeness with others. In the mental area of the anxiously attached individual's life, it's very important, though this will not necessarily come as naturally to them, it is very important that the anxiously attached individual spends time to self-reflect and build relationship to themselves. The anxiously attached person can be so quick to abandon themselves and go connect with everybody else and spend so much of their time focused on external relationships that sometimes the sort of primary casualty becomes the relationship to themselves. And it's really important that they intentionally carve out this time to self-connect, to get to know themselves. And this can be through things like journaling, through self-reflection questions, through monitoring their feelings and needs and checking in, or through other strategies like meditation or breathing exercises, just things that are actually connecting them to themselves, grounding them in their body, and forcing them to actually value their alone time. Because a lot of anxiously attached individuals tend to have a little bit of emotional patterning that where they'll fear loneliness, or they don't like the feeling of being alone, or they'll get anxious when they're in their alone time. And again, it's really important that they build that relationship to themselves. It's also important in the mental arena that they have some kind of support in whatever learning they're doing. So they tend to work best in study groups, or feel like there's some kind of collective in the learning that they're doing. It's also really important for the anxiously attached individual to find quite a bit of learning and stimulation. They can be really effective with anything human behavior oriented, connection oriented. They generally are quite good in sales areas. So a lot of their learning in the mental areas tend to have something to do with people as a general rule. Emotionally, it's also very important that the anxiously attached individual take the time to do emotional processing work. Feel your emotions, work through them, work through the stories that exist underneath them, work through the actions you take because of your emotions, and just really take the time to connect to your emotions and understand what's going on inside of you. Again, because there's such a strong tendency for the anxiously attached person to be so focused on everything that's going on outside of them. It's also extremely important for the anxiously attached individual as a general rule that they feel like they can emotionally express themselves to their partner. Anxiously attached individuals tend to be big sharers, and they like to have the conversations about their feelings and what happened throughout their day, and it's a really beautiful thing. And that tends to be something that's really important in their friendships, family relationships, and romantic relationships. It's also really important that the anxiously attached individual learns to trust themselves and set boundaries. A lot of times, this person will sort of abandon themselves in favor of other people's needs and in favor of other people's feelings, and they can be very creative and thoughtful in close relationships for how they show up and all the beautiful things that they do. but sometimes, again, this comes at the expense of the relationship to themselves, and they'll sort of forget to take care of their own needs, or they'll forget to really put energy into their own desires or goals. And again, you really want to make sure you're keeping that sense of self, keeping those boundaries as you enter into romantic relationships, because otherwise that overgiving to others and undergiving to yourself will create that perception of imbalance, which, remember, is how conflict is really born. So one other thing that's quite important on the emotional front, and this is sort of a reminder from earlier in this course, is when you feel negative emotions, instead of just reacting to them, we want to be aware of them and use them as sort of those alarm bells to go inwards and check in with our stories or our unmet needs. So we want to be responding effectively and productively through our emotional responses instead of just reacting out of them. And again, this is really important for the anxiously attached individual, because we know that sometimes we can be reactive in romantic relationships especially, and as a result of that reactivity, it can come across as criticism or things that can push partners from alternating attachment styles away in the process. Spiritually, I find that it's really important, again, that the anxiously attached person is involved in some kind of community. So, it doesn't have to necessarily believe in something specific, but a sort of a general belief in something greater tends to be quite important for the anxiously attached individual to feel grounded. And anything that involves some kind of community of learning in that area or investigating in that area is very healthy for the anxiously attached individual. Physical. It's quite important that the anxiously attached individual has exercise and exerts their energy, because they do tend to be quite high-level energy people as well. So anything that involves any kind of group activity, if it's like a group walking group club or a social fitness class, something that has a group dynamic specifically, will create that extra incentive for your subconscious mind. So you'll naturally procrastinate exercising less and find that you just have a more intrinsic response, and you're quite excited to take part in that activity specifically. It's also quite important for the anxiously attached individual to build a healthy relationship to themselves, to their body, to have kindness towards their body and to themselves. Again, the anxiously attached person can be so quick to go outside of themselves, and they can be so externally focused. And it's important that there's some kind of conscious intention on a regular basis for self-connection. This is also why things like yoga can be really beneficial for the anxiously attached individual. It grounds you back into yourself again. Financially, the anxiously attached individual does very well with goals. If there isn't some sort of intentional goal set for the anxiously attached individual, they can sort of throw their finances to the side and, again, become so much more naturally focused on relationships. So something that's keeping you accountable and keeping you tracking and checking in is really effective. I find, as well as a general rule, that when the anxiously attached individual starts to share their finances with their partner, so let's say when they get married and they combine their accounts, I find that anxiously attached individuals actually become more motivated financially, because they feel like they're contributing to somebody else, and because they generally value other people's needs and expectations a little bit more than they do their own, they tend to get more motivated financially when they see that there's this combination of accounts. Again, this isn't always the case, just a general rule that I see. Anything where there's a why financially that's related to love, like, let me become more financially secure because I'm going to help my children. Let me become more financially secure because my parents need to be taken care of. My siblings need some help. This tends to be very motivating for the anxiously attached individual, again, because a lot of their subconscious needs are very much related to connection, love, helping others, contributing, these sorts of facets of the psyche. So last but not least, in the romantic relationship department, things that are important to the anxiously attached individual are a very strong romantic connection, a lot of consistency, a lot of connection, like frequency of connection, a lot of validation, reinforcement, feeling like they can share and communicate themselves. And then the things that the anxiously attached individual needs to work on specifically are, again, maintaining their identity, making sure that they have boundaries set out, making sure that they don't toss away the other 6 areas of their life in favor of the relationship area of their life, and put the relationship area of their life so far in the lead of importance that other aspects of their life can sort of suffer accordingly. Because here's the thing, if we become so focused on relationships, to the detriment of our finances or our career or other areas of life that are also very important, eventually there's some kind of chaos that happens in those areas that will naturally have to steal our time from the relationship area anyways, to go deal with or cope with the emergencies that are happening in the other 7 areas. So it's very important that when you look through those 7 major areas of life, you are setting goals in each area that are actually helping to maintain balance and succinctness between all of these areas, so that you're on point, that you're not losing time and just abandoning yourself for romantic relationships. So in the next module, we're going to go through a lot about boundaries and discussing how to effectively communicate boundaries, but I can't really emphasize that enough as a need for the anxiously attached individual. They tend to naturally forego their needs and see the needs of their partner, and maybe not even become fully conscious about the fact that they are repressing their needs in favor of helping or pleasing other people, which to a certain degree is meeting some of their own needs as well, because they'll get into this space where they're going, but I need to feel loved by my partner, so I'm happy to extend myself to get that need for feeling loved met, or that need for feeling needed or important met. But keep in mind, there's all these other needs that exist within your personality dynamic that you have to be accountable for meeting within yourself as well. So it's also important that the anxiously attached individual feel like they're understood by their partner, feel like their feelings are validated and seen and heard by their partner. And it's also important that the anxiously attached individual recognize when the honeymoon phase is over in a relationship, it does not mean that the relationship is over, and to learn how to settle into the different phases of a relationship. So sometimes, because the anxiously attached person will be called the love addict, they can so crave that high of connection and all the oxytocin and dopamine and neurochemicals that are flowing, and they're almost like addicted to some of those neurochemicals, and often as the honeymoon phase ends or sort of settles down, the anxiously attached individual will feel that withdrawal from those neurochemicals and will start to sort of look elsewhere and maybe have emotional crushes or feelings for other people a lot more easily than other attachment styles as a general rule. And as a result of that, they can also fear that their partner feels the same way, project that onto their partner, and then even create some of their own stories of insecurity as a result. So it's quite important that the anxiously attached individual learn the different phases of love and learn that after the honeymoon phase, there's a settling in phase where they can start to build more deep and fulfilling connection that's based on fulfillment instead of sort of pleasure seeking from that high, and to make sure that they are always investing in ongoing growth and deeper connection with their partner to sort of keep that flow of that neurochemistry alive to a certain degree. So interactions with other attachment styles. I often see between the fearful avoidant and anxiously attached individual, sometimes the fearful avoidant will think they're being manipulated or trapped by the anxiously attached individual because they can sort of start becoming more avoidant, right? Like wherever the fearful avoidant attachment style individual is in the attachment spectrum, so if they're in the middle, right, essentially between the dismissive and the anxiously attached individual. Not that it quite works like that, but you can think of it that way. And so when there was somebody anxious, they become more avoidant naturally. Just like when there was somebody dismissive avoidant, they'll start to become more anxious. So with the anxious individual, the fearful avoidant sometimes feels like they're being suffocated. And again, they start to sort of express those traits of the dismissive avoidant. So they'll feel trapped, burdened. Sometimes they'll resent that enmeshment that can naturally happen, especially in the early stages with these two attachment styles, because both are super present, quite capable of deep connection, and tend to sort of go all in during the honeymoon phase of love. And then as that starts to fade out, that honeymoon phase, sometimes the fearful avoidant will sort of withdraw, and that will be very triggering for the anxiously attached individual. So it's really important in this dynamic that both attachment styles learn to communicate and express their needs on a regular basis and make both of their needs safe and okay, and not people please in this dynamic and not self-sacrifice, because that will create a lot of chaos and resentment in the dynamic itself. Both these attachment styles, because they can be so enmeshed, and sometimes that's the subconscious comfort zone for each of these individuals, it's really important that they create healthy habits within themselves to maintain their self-identity, to connect to themselves as individuals. Now, the anxiously attached individual and the dismissive avoidant individual can be a very chaotic attachment dynamic. And sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the anxious avoidant trap. And the fearful avoidant also falls into that anxious avoidant trap category. But the dismissive avoidant, because they do not do so well with their vulnerability and the emotional expression that the anxiously attached individual almost expect out of them once the honeymoon phase is over, they'll tend to feel like a little bit confused, afraid, sometimes even insecure. And the anxiously attached individual has a tendency to become quite critical, because when they feel their partner withdrawing, criticism is what happens whenever we have a lack of being able to be vulnerable. So instead of saying, hey, I'm feeling afraid because I sense that you're pulling away, oftentimes the anxious attachment style individual will say, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you emotionally available? Something's going on with you. And remember, that dismissive avoidant, that really touches on a lot of their core wounds. What something's wrong with me is one of the core wounds of the dismissive avoidant, and some of that shame that can go along with that wound. And so these two attachment styles will really trigger a lot of each other's core wounds, because of course the dismissive triggers the anxious attachment style's fear of abandonment. And then because that fear is triggered, often the anxious's coping mechanism or strategy is to become very critical, and that can further push the dismissive avoidant away and really touch on their core wounds. So it's really important that these two attachment styles learn how to express their feelings, learn how to express their needs. So one example of this would be for the dismissive avoidant to say to their anxious partner, hey, you know what? I really need space. I know that that's not as important to you in a relationship, but it's really important to me to feel like I can maintain my sense of identity, to feel like I can have some space and just refuge within myself every so often, and to feel like I don't get enmeshed with my partner. And it's not a reflection of how much I love you or care about this relationship. It's literally just part of my own programming and part of my own intrinsic needs. And I need us to be able to compromise in this area. So what the clarity of expression does between these two attachment styles in this dynamic is it allows the dismissive avoidant to discuss their needs, share their needs, and it allows the anxiously attached individual to depersonalize that, because anxiously attached individuals are very quick to place a story on their dismissive avoidant partner's withdrawing. As an example, you might see something like the dismissive avoidant partner is a little bit cold and shut down when they come home because they've had a really long day. And the anxiously attached individual, who's almost, consistently hungering for that connection, will come, make a bid to their partner, feel like that bid is rejected, and then turn around and go, oh my gosh, my partner's feelings are changing, or this person's falling out of love with me, or they don't care anymore, or we're disconnecting and they want to leave. And they'll trigger in their own stories from their own belief patterns and subconscious programming this idea or concept that their partner is on their way out or leaving. And by the dismissive avoidant individual clearly communicating their needs, it actually allows the anxiously attached individual to depersonalize that, to not create a story around it, and to recognize that, hey, we just have different needs and different wiring and different programming, and that's okay. And literally, the anxiously attached individual and dismissive avoidant individual, your styles are essentially here to balance each other out. Like, you both have very powerful lessons for one another. So the anxiously attached individual has to learn to maintain their sense of self-identity in a relationship when the dismissive avoidant isn't completely emotionally available all the time. It actually forces the anxiously attached individual to spend some time alone, to self-reflect, to do self-work, to meet some of their own needs, and to communicate their feelings and needs in a healthy and constructive way, which again is something that they may not do often because they naturally and instinctively repress their needs in favor of meeting others as a subconscious strategy to then get their needs met. And so the dismissive avoidant is also forced by their anxiously attached partner to be more vulnerable, to express their emotions more, to compromise a little bit more, to open up, to share a little bit more. And both of you literally are here to balance each other out through really powerful lessons. And it really heals both of your attachment styles. If done effectively, it brings you back into a secure space. Keep in mind as well, as discussed earlier in this course, it's also very important when it comes to attachment style healing to do the belief reprogramming work at the same time. So something else that can be very powerful for this anxious avoidant dynamic is to recognize that even though you may have very distinctly separate needs on one level, On another level, there is a space that these needs can be quite relatable. So let me give you an example. Often in this dynamic, I see that the anxiously attached individual wants more time together, and the dismissive avoidant attachment individual wants more space from their partner. And so when we look at a surface level, it's like, wow, what do we do because our needs are so incompatible? And at that more surface level, it's important to lay out very specifically and explicitly how much time you need to feel safe and connected in the dynamic and how much space you need to feel safe and connected to yourself, and then come to a compromise. But on a deeper level, why do each of these attachment styles want this? Well, the anxiously attached individual generally wants more connection to their partner, more time to their partner, because they're seeking that emotional connection need. They're equating time with emotional connection. Now, the dismissive avoidant partner wants space because when they feel like they have their space and time to themselves, they actually tend to show up better and feel more balanced and whole and stable, and then they're actually more available for more emotional connection. So underneath, it's actually the same thing to a certain degree. Both are seeking connection, and through the anxiously attached individual holding a little bit more space for the dismissive avoidant partner, usually what we'll find is that the quality of connection improves dramatically through that compromise, and quantity is never as important as quality of connection in a relationship. So as an analogy, if you have two partners and they live together and they're spending lots of time together, but one's always on their phone or they're watching television, instead of uniquely connecting, having deep conversations, discussing their feelings and needs and boundaries, checking in with one another, doing shared activities, validating and encouraging each other, and doing things that are quality based in a relationship, then that quantity of time really isn't that significant. So keep in mind that even though it can seem like you have deeply opposing needs, really underneath, by sharing and holding space for each other's needs and really compromising, it actually helps both of you to come to a better quality of how you show up in the relationship. So lastly, two anxiously attached individuals together often will see that they can become quite enmeshed quite quickly. And it's really important that if these two anxiously attached individuals do come together in a relationship, which believe it or not is actually a little bit rare, that each individual is making a conscious intention to take time for themselves, to have boundaries, to meet their needs outside of just expecting one another to meet the needs, because really these two people can fall into this trap of making each other responsible for one another's happiness and for always meeting each other's needs. And it's really challenging because we're not mind readers. So even if both anxiously attached individuals are quite attuned to one another and quite thoughtful and spend a lot of time thinking about each other's feelings and needs, unless you are effectively expressing these feelings and needs on a regular basis, sometimes we're going to miss the mark. And if two anxiously attached individuals get into a relationship together, there usually is this unconscious expectation that, oh, well, if my partner loves me, they're going to know my needs and meet them all the time, and I'm expected to do the same. And not only does that put a lot of pressure on us as individuals, but it also brings a lot of pressure into the relationship dynamic, which is just unnecessary. So we want to make sure we're communicating our feelings and needs. We want to also make sure that we are able to meet our own feelings and needs, so we're not entering into a codependent relationship. And, codependent relationships often come with quite a bit of chaos and drama when the needs are not met, because we expect that, our partner is our only source of getting our needs met, and we can sort of push away unconsciously the other ways of meeting our needs, like through other friends, family members, through ourselves. So it's really important that these two individuals work to maintain their sense of self-identity and work to maintain the communication of their feelings and needs and question some of the unconscious expectations that come into the relationship. So surface those expectations and really question them. And, some of these expectations are things like, I expect that my partner is responsible for my feelings, for my happiness. I'm responsible for theirs. I have to know their needs and meet them at all times. And we really want to do work around these. And lastly, for the anxiously attached individual and the secure partner, which again, whenever we're with a secure partner, we tend to naturally take on more of the secure traits and qualities because it's quite inherent in us to want to behave in a secure way. But oftentimes we just don't have the knowing or the tools or ways to. But it's really important that, again, there's this conflict communication happening, expression of feelings and needs, understanding that each individual needs to maintain their identity outside of the relationship and not fall into a codependent trap. And also learn to settle in, for the anxiously attached individual, learn to settle in to a relationship. Sometimes I'll hear anxiously attached people say things like, oh, my partner's so secure, it's almost boring, or I don't really know how to approach it. I feel like, there's not this high. And again, we are not seeking pleasure out of relationships. We're seeking fulfillment, we're seeking balance, and we're seeking health. And that is what makes for a lasting and growing relationship. So this brings us to exercise 7. And exercise 7 is all about becoming aware of self-abandonment patterns and then doing the work to change up these patterns. So the purpose of this exercise is to identify the areas you might be subconsciously self-abandoning your needs in the 7 areas of life. And we'll follow this up with creating new strategies to put an end to this cycle once and for all. So you're going to start by just referring to the different 7 areas of life. And just write down a list of ways you abandon yourself by ignoring your needs, people-pleasing, valuing approval over your truth, or over-giving to keep yourself safe. So maybe some examples could be, I do the work for my coworkers and end up falling behind on my own deadlines. Okay? Maybe you find I don't say no to things I don't want to do, and I end up dreading work instead. Maybe you also find I am afraid to speak up in meetings because I'm worried about what others think. So you're really taking inventory so you can become conscious of these things, and then we can start changing them. Maybe finances, I always pay for my partner. I would rather it was a 50-50 split, right? So you might find that. Mental, I don't share my thoughts and opinions when I disagree with a friend because I'm afraid of disconnecting. Okay, mental has a lot to do with like your thoughts, opinions, those sorts of things. Emotional, you might say, I always caretake for how others feel. I often don't take myself into consideration. I said always, try to avoid absolutes. You might say often. Spiritual, this could be things like you put your spiritual practice last because you're so busy doing what other people expect from you, or people pleasing. It could be that you don't have boundaries in your spiritual community. You always say yes to volunteering when really you need some extra time to be with your kids. It could be anything in that area. Physical could be things related to health, to your own well-being, to your actual physical boundaries and needs. Maybe I skip exercising to take phone calls all the time with my friend who's going through a breakup, and really I need to tell my friend, I'm here for you, but I can't necessarily talk every single day for as long as we do. I need to do a workout, and then I'll call you after, for 30 minutes, whatever it might be. And then relationship, it can be friends, family, romantic relationships as well. And then what you're going to do is for each of these, you're going to create a list of strategies in order to change, okay? And you're going to practice these strategies on a regular basis, like we talk about action reprogramming, which is on a daily basis, actioning a new strategy over time so that it feels normal. It becomes your new normal, becomes your new subconscious comfort zone. So you might say, for career, and you'll do this for each, but you might say, I will practice telling coworkers who want me to do their work, I would love to support you, but I have my own deadlines to meet. I believe in you and know you can do this yourself. Okay, another example is you might say, I'm happy to help you, but I only have 5 minutes, right? So you can be supportive, but within a time frame that works for yourself. And so what you're basically going to do here is you're going to go through each of these major things and create a strategy or set of strategies. Remember, you kind of have unlimited space because you can keep going like this. And the point here is to have new ways of actioning responses to these things. And over time, this will feel normal and empowering. In this module, we are going to go through some basic important steps for proper conflict communication that will lead to resolution. So, we first have to understand that most of our emotional associations to conflict in childhood felt really bad. They did not feel good. So, for the vast majority of the time, whenever there was some kind of conflict, we were sort of on the losing end as children. We were helpless and we were dependent, and usually we were told that we were bad or not good enough. And usually any kind of criticism from our parents was followed up with some form of shaming or punishment, like maybe a timeout or a spanking or yelling or something that didn't feel good. So all of us have a lot of subconsciously stored associations to conflict as not really being so nice. And so what happens is when we go to communicate our feelings and needs in relationship to a partner or in relationship to another individual, a lot of the time, if we don't have a really specific tailored approach that's really effective at getting us heard, we'll go to express ourselves and then we'll trigger the other person without meaning to, and then they shut down and push back and defend, and we go into this sort of power struggle unconsciously because both of us are just trying to protect ourselves from feeling pain. So I have a set of methods that I'm going to just take you through for a moment. One's going to be in long form and one's going to be in short form for how to effectively approach conflict in a way that will get your feelings understood, your needs met, and actually make sure that you're breaking down and resolving any obstacles that are standing between yourself and your partner in a relationship. So keep in mind as well, this can also be applied to, your boss or a colleague or a friend or a parent. This can really go through any areas of your life. So you understand your core wounds by this time. They're all in the workbook for you. You can circle anything that pops up for you. And we've done a really, deep dive into what the fearful avoidance core wounds are. Now, if you've watched some of the other attachment style videos or taken some of the other attachment style courses, and you know the attachment styles of individuals around you, you'll have a pretty good idea of what everybody else's attachment style is and what their core wounds are. This isn't a necessary piece in order to proceed, but if we understand and we have some awareness of what triggers the person that we want to have a conversation with, this is a great way to condition your mind to change your relationship to conflict itself in a long form way. So this is a great practice. So the first step of this practice is to recognize that we lower our ability to get heard if we sound like we are blaming somebody at all, and if we accidentally step on another person's core wounds, because then they get triggered and they're so busy defending themselves they can't really hear what we're saying or understand where we're coming from. So one of the first steps to conflict resolution communication is to put on paper all the core wounds that you think could be triggered by the conversation you're about to have with this specific person. So for example, let's say that your partner has a really core wound around abandonment. And let's say you really feel like you need to be heard. You might start by writing down in your workbook there, okay, they have a core wound around abandonment. So trigger would be fear of abandonment. And then what you want to do is you want to begin your conversation by prefacing it to sidestep the core wound. So it might look something like this. You might say, hey, I want to discuss something with you so we can keep growing together in our relationship. I really appreciate how well things have been going, but there's something specific that I find to be a block, and because I care about you, I don't want anything to stand between us. So essentially, if you notice, what you're doing is you're telling the person in advance, hey, I'm not abandoning you, okay? And the same thing can go for criticism. If somebody has a big wound around feeling criticized or rejected, maybe you start off by validating something very specific about them and appreciating them in some way. If the person has a core wound around feeling unloved, maybe you just enforce at the beginning, hey, I really love you, I really care about you, this is what I'm feeling, okay? So first step is to become aware of a person's core wounds, put them on paper, and then tailor your approach so that you're bypassing that in advance. Again, this first step is so that you can actually get your feelings and needs seen and heard and understood. Step 2 is to then express your feeling. The reason we express our feelings is so that people can't personalize it, because there's a major difference when we're in a sort of potentially heated or friction-based situation. There's a huge difference between saying, you never call me, versus, hey, I feel disconnected when we don't speak on the phone enough. Major difference. One is easy for a person to take personally, especially when we all have these negative associations to conflict or criticism. And another is an opportunity for somebody to understand you and actually make changes. So step 2 is to insert your feeling. I feel. And then where you have your because, you can say because or when as the secondary part of the sentence, just to explain a little bit. You want to make sure in that explanation bracket that you don't use the word you if you can avoid it, because again, sometimes you gets easily personalized by another individual. And again, you're not doing this to walk on eggshells around a person. You're doing this to make sure that you can finally feel understood and heard, when all of us tend to have these sort of negative sets of programming or associations to these tough conversations at times. So step 1, you preface. Step 2, you insert your feelings. Step 3, you're going to insert your need. So I want you to tell this person what you need. And this could be, I need more validation in the relationship. I need you to make space to hear my feelings. Whatever it might be, you want to be as specific as possible. The more specific you are, you're not leaving a person hanging. Sometimes a fearful avoidant will be with somebody of another attachment style who just doesn't take, general broad terms very easily. So let's say, for example, the fearful avoidant is with a dismissive avoidant. If you say, I need support, sometimes the dismissive avoidant needs specific explanation for what support actually looks like. For one person, support might be speaking on the phone more or texting more often. For another person, support might look like a compliment or a validation or showing up to family gatherings more often. It could be so different for so many different people. So it's really important that you get really specific in that third step. I need, and then insert, the strategy for how they can meet that need. And then as a fourth step in this long form range, you can just say to a person, thank you, or what do you feel in need, and do something that's sort of cementing that not only are you coming in peace to have this conversation, but you want to leave this conversation in peace as well. And this is so important, because if we don't communicate about our feelings and needs, if they stay repressed, they're all building walls slowly between ourselves and other people we love or care about in relationships. And we have to make sure that we start tearing these walls down in order to be healthily interdependent. So ideally, the space that we all want to get to is to become a master of identifying our own feelings and needs so we can go meet them ourselves whenever we need to. And that we can feel rooted in our capacity and ability to meet our needs and enjoy doing so. And we also want to be a master of understanding our feelings and needs so we can effectively communicate them to the people we care about, whether it's a parent, a loved one, a sibling, a coworker, so that we can feel understood and we can feel connected, not with all these walls in between us because we don't actually share ourselves. So the short version of this, okay, you can write these things all out on paper in your workbook. The short version of this, if you're working with somebody or you're having a conversation with somebody and you have a more surface level relationship, is you can just start working on expressing your needs to people. You can just start at the need space and just say, hey, I need a little bit more connection in the relationship, and this is what it looks like. And it's not as, it may not make you feel as understood, but sometimes if we're working with really difficult people who who can get triggered very easily, we can just go straight to the need. Or sometimes if it's more in a professional setting where we may not engage the feelings and maybe we don't need our feelings to be heard by our boss or our colleague to the same degree, we can just start practicing expressing our need. And I want you to keep in mind, you can ask yourself this really important question: what is the cost to the relationship if I don't express this, versus what are the benefits if I actually start to and I learn how to get comfortable doing this? And what you'll see is that it's not really a question. There are tremendous benefits to finally being yourself, learning how to open up, practicing conflict communication in a way that actually gets your needs met. And the alternative is you're sort of on a trajectory, no matter what, to ending the relationship at a point in time, because you're just allowing these walls to keep building between you two, and you're allowing the relationship to sort of keep filling up with resentment over time, and that doesn't tend to end well for long-lasting relationships. So I hope you apply these tools. They're super effective, they're super empowering and freeing, and they also help us to start building positive associations to conflict, because conflict starts becoming something healthy. It resolves our problems, it breaks down walls between ourselves and people we care about, and we start to feel like we are finally seen, heard, and understood by others. Exercise 8, which is all about conflict communication with your feelings and needs. So the purpose of this exercise is to recognize that when we go to communicate our feelings and needs to a partner, a lot of the time, especially if we don't take a specifically tailored approach, we might go to express ourselves and trigger the other person without meaning to. So we need to effectively approach conflict to get our feelings understood, our needs met, and to make sure we are breaking down obstacles that are standing between ourselves and our partners. So we're just going to start by validating the other person's emotions or stepping around their potential core wounds. So let's just say, for example, that somebody is really sensitive to criticism, okay, and to feeling unacknowledged or underappreciated. So you might just start by saying, I really appreciate you, and I'm not here to criticize you at all, but I just want to share something so I don't end up internalizing it. Okay, so you're basically saying, I come in peace, I'm not here to criticize, and your intentions for having this type of conversation. And then you might say, when the situation happened the other day, and let's pretend the situation is that somebody forgot to pick you up from work, and you said, when the situation happened, I interpret it in my reality as me being unworthy of being remembered, or as me being not cared about. Okay, so you're identifying, and the reason we say I interpret it in my reality is you're really making it not personal. You're not saying you made me feel this way. You're saying this is how I interpreted it when that situation happened. So forgotten about and unworthy of being remembered. Or you might say not cared for. Just pick one. And then you can say, I needed this person too. You're sort of setting it up ahead of time, but essentially this is the conversation you're going to have with this individual. So I needed you to remember or try to call if you knew, or let's say call once you realized you forgot. And then maybe you say, I needed you to apologize and let me know you do care about me, and it was about you being distracted as opposed to you not caring for me. Okay, so maybe you need an apology and some reassurance, okay, and paint the picture of how you can get this need met. You might turn around. We sort of painted the picture here a little bit, but you can take it a step further and say, I really need to hear that from you right now. Okay, so we painted the picture here, and you can make it more actionable here by saying, I need this right now. The example we have here is if you want more affection, you might say, I want more affection here, and then painting the picture might be, I need a hug each night before bed, right? So just being really specific what it looks like, making it actionable and simple. And if you follow these steps here, these steps are going to be things that you can move through to really see the other side as you move through potential conflict in the future. Okay, just really outlining how the conversation should go, noticing their emotions if you're on the other side of the equation. And part 2 here is all about understanding over conflict. So